Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. Today, I am speaking with a very special guest, Dr. Nadine Macaluso, or as you guys may know her as Dr. Nay. Dr. Nay is a licensed marriage and family therapist and expert in trauma bonds, shame, and complex PTSD or CPTSD. She is also the ex-wife to the Wolf of Wall Street. She recently wrote a book, Run Like Hell, that was published on January 9th, 2024, which I highly recommend. She currently has over 400,000 followers between Instagram and TikTok. Please follow her. She is a wealth of information. We are going to be talking to Dr. Nay about her relationship with the Wolf of Wall Street. Many of you have probably read the book, saw the movie. We dive into what that relationship was like for her. She talks about how her pain in that relationship became entertainment for people in a sense. She talks about her journey, her process of healing, how she got out of the relationship, but most importantly, once she got out, how she continued to heal despite the obstacles, despite the confusion, despite her pain, and how she got to where she is now. She shows a tremendous amount of resiliency, of just, mental toughness. She is an amazing human being. And I think you're really going to benefit from this episode. For those of you who are either in a narcissistic abusive relationship or in the process of getting out of one, or even on the other side of it, Nadine really helps us see what that process is like, gives you strategies on how to get to the other side, how to get through it, and just really gives you that hope that so many, I know my listeners, my patients, struggle to find sometimes. So I really think this episode isn't just going to give you information, but it's really going to give you that sense of hope and the promise that there is something better after this. There is a way to get through this and to get to the other side. Thank you so much for joining us today. You know how excited I am to have you on here. I think you're amazing. Your story is incredible. And more importantly, how you navigated through this and got to the other side. And so I just want to kind of dive in and start with, for people who aren't familiar, or who at least even are familiar, talk about your prior relationship, because it was a very, we'll say, in the media relationship.
Yeah. Why don't we say it was one for the movies?
Yeah. So let's start there. And I'm going to kind of let you lead on this and just kind of talk about the relationship, what it was, and then we'll kind of switch gears into how you got out.
Sure. So I would say that in my early 20s, and actually throughout my whole 20s, I was in a quintessential trauma bond with my ex-husband, the Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort. And it started as most trauma bonds do, right? With love bombing and promises of love and adoration forever and extreme affection and very intense and fast paced. And then it blew up like a lot of trauma bonds do.
How long would you say you were with him where it was just that love bombing intensity?
I would say for the first 6 months, really. Yeah. And then the love bombing continued throughout the whole relationship. But after 6 months was when his mask started to fall and the intimidation and the domination and the need for control started pretty quickly, I would say.
And so for people who are listening, because what I find, I'm sure you see this too in your practice and working with people, in retrospect, it's easy to figure out what happens. But when you're in it, it is a whole different ballgame. And I tell people all the time with love bombing, it doesn't matter how smart you are, how psychologically savvy you are. It just takes over, because who doesn't love to feel loved and admired. And, and so when it switched, and people always say, like, well, do you know? And how will you know? And so can you describe the moment or the moments or the lead up to when you realized something wasn't right?
Yeah, I have two thoughts on that. One thing I say is that if it feels too good to be true, it probably is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Yep.
trust gut. And for me, once I saw this extreme switch in behavior. So here is this extreme adoration, love, almost just over the top obsessive love. And then all of a sudden it became just so cruel and intimidating and threatening. And I that happens once, but if you see a pattern of that, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this isn't, again, for the people listening, this isn't where things are going great, because everybody in the beginning of a relationship, for the most part, is great and wonderful. What you're talking about is a tidal wave of just
Yeah.
intensity and love and gifts and admiration and just, intimacy, all of it. Just, it's like it knocks you off your feet. Not this gradual, it's good. I,
Exactly.
I really think I like this person. I could see a
Exactly.
future.
Yes.
What happened when you say that major switch? What was that? What did that look like? What did that feel like for you? Because I would imagine it's pretty jarring.
Yeah. So what had happened is that, well, first of all, I didn't grow up in a house with any yelling or rage. So I had never witnessed rage. And what happened was that I would want something different than he would, right? I would try to set a boundary about when to get married, when to have children, right? Which are very big value oriented
Sure.
decisions. And then this tsunami of rage came out like, how dare you set boundaries? You're going to do it when I want it. It's my way or the highway. And I just was like, what the hell is happening here?
Mm-hmm.
Because and I didn't have all the words for it back then, but I was like, wait, this guy says he loves me. Doesn't he care about also when I want these things?
Mm-hmm.
And it was shocking to my system.
Yeah, because it's not just an argument. It is a total shift in
No,
character, right? I mean, their character's the same
exactly.
the whole time, but how it appears to the other person is this extreme shift. You will not have to question, was it an argument? Was it not? It's this distinct shift in
Yeah, yeah,
behavior. And
yeah. So
so
the whole thing changes.
when that happened, did your gut tell you run, or did your gut tell you, what did I do wrong? Let me fix it.
My gut was really, I'm trying to think because it was a long time ago, was like, first of all, what the hell is happening?
Mm-hmm.
This is nothing that I'm recognizing. I had no point of reference, even from my childhood or
Yeah.
anything, for this sort of behavior. And because I'm an agreeable, relationship oriented person and I was very young, my gut was like, okay, you know what? He just must love me so much that, okay, I'm just going to give into this because, I didn't realize it was coercive control. I thought it was just, he just loves me so much. Let me please him.
Yes. Yes. And so, obviously that happened repeatedly, got worse.
Yes.
From being in that relationship and seeing this happen and seeing that instability in mood and that affect dysregulation and the behaviors, the coercive control, all that, you were also around a lot of other people at all times. And, and these social circles, right? So how was it for you to see him around other people, and what did that look like, and how confusing was that for you?
Yeah, the thing about my ex is that he was pretty consistent with his dominating ways. So it wasn't just with me, it
Mm-hmm.
was with other people. But the difference was that he made everybody so much money, so they didn't care the way he behaved,
Right.
right? They just were like made excuses for it because they wanted to ride the money train.
That's right. That's right. And it's an important point to bring up, because when we think about coercive control, oftentimes we think about intimate relationships, we think about verbal abuse, we think about love bombing. But I think it's an important point to bring up that one of the ways
Yes.
that narcissists, especially narcissists who are in positions of authority and power, um, they use finances,
Oh, for
right?
sure.
We hear about financial abuse, right? But we hear about it in more of a restricting way. But in this case, it was financial abuse in terms of, if you cross me or piss me off, you're not going to make any money anymore. So
Yeah.
it was this different kind of financial control. And this, exactly like you said, they wanted the money.
Yeah, but if you're nice to me and do as I say, you're going to get a Rolex. I'm going to help you buy a house. You're going to drive a Ferrari, right?
Mm-hmm. So when the relationship ended, what what kind of strategies, or what was your cognitive process when you finally hit that point? And again, when I say finally, for people listening, when you're getting out of this type of trauma bonds, when you're getting out of this type of relationship, this is not I've been thinking about this for a long time, this isn't working for me, it's just not working for us anymore, I'm done. It doesn't look like that. It's not that any breakup's easy, but it's not that simplistic. I mean, this is a process. It's interwoven, it's intertangled psychologically, cognitively, financially, socially. So, what did that process of starting to take yourself out of that relationship look like? And when, if there was even a breaking point for you?
Yeah. So, like you say, it's a slow burn, right? Because of the mix of the intermittent abuse. He's good, he's bad. Um, you always have, I'm going to leave. Oh, he's going to get better. I'm going to leave. Oh, he's going to get better. Right. But then finally you realize, okay, he's not getting better. This relationship isn't getting better. And there were a few moments for me, one was when I told him that I'm leaving you, which I made all the mistakes. So don't do what I'm telling you I did. But let me tell you
Oh,
what
that's important.
I did.
That's important, I think, for people
Yeah.
to hear is, what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah, because I didn't have a book to read. I
Sure.
was like going by the seat of my pants type of thing. And I said to him, I'm not going to sit here and watch you kill yourself. All your sick friends are just don't give a shit about you.
Right.
And you have to go to rehab or I'm leaving you. And he went crazy and he threw my clothing and jewelry and lit them on fire. And it's like, I don't want to say what he told me because it's, it's too violent, but, got very aggressive with me. And I was very, very scared. And then the next day, the violence continued where he said to me, I'm going to take our daughter on a private plane. Now he's whacked out of his mind on coke. And I'm like, no, you're not. And I had left my house and I was with my mother. And she said, when you go home, tell the police you're going home to a domestic violence situation before you walk in the door. Thanks, Mom. And I
How
did.
was that, hearing that I mean,
Oh,
what was it,
yeah.
especially from your mom, what was it like to hear those words and say, like, oh, wait, that's what this is,
I
because
knew she was right. I knew she was right.
yeah,
And so she said, do you want me to go with you? And I said, don't go. You're just going to aggravate him. I can do this. And and that was when he grabbed my daughter, was walking up the stairs, and then kicked me down the stairs, which I could have easily
yeah,
snapped my neck, but
mhm,
God willing, I didn't. I was 31. I was in good shape. And
mhm.
then I ran up the stairs, dialed 911 and hung up. And then
Smart.
then the police came. So once that violence ensued, the good news was he did go to rehab. He did come back to me, but I was done.
Hmm.
And then a year later, he did get arrested. And I knew that his ankle bracelet was my freedom
Yes,
because
yes,
he couldn't hurt me anymore. And I always tell my patients that they don't always have that luxury of their partner getting arrested,
that's right, that's right, that's right. And
right?
oftentimes we know in family court, when it comes to kids, even, that it doesn't work out in the woman's
Right.
favor, which is a
Yes.
whole other discussion. But
That's right. That's right. So I had two major breaking points, and one was just I had a ticket to ride. I was like, now you are the government's problem. You are being watched. It's clear you're bad. I'm good. You can no longer hurt me.
hmm
And it was, and then, but, I had been, like you say, I'd been working up to that in my brain to finally find the strength to fully confront him, right?
Mhm.
And that is a very scary thing to do. And I would never tell anybody to do that now. What I would say to them is never tell them you're leaving, never let them see you coming. Behind the scenes, plan your exit.
That's right. I always say it's like a duck in water, right? On the surface, everything looks calm, but underneath, it's like you're pedaling for your life.
Yes,
In a
yes,
sense.
yes, yes. And now I say to them, you're wearing the mask.
That's right. That's right.
But I did not do it that way. I had nobody to guide me.
Yeah, I mean, for people that aren't aware of these narcissist blueprints, I mean, it's so confusing. It's craziness. It's to even be able to do what you did when it's like this bubble. And unless somebody is there to help pull you out, you don't even know the degree to which you're being abused,
No,
right? It's not just, I don't mean just to minimize it, but it's not physical abuse. It's this other type of insidious abuse that is so unrecognizable, especially for people on the outside. They don't even know there's something to pull you out of.
that's right.
So the fact that you did this on your own, without help, without even understanding what you were going through at the time,
I had no idea.
I mean, the odds were so stacked. This is why I think you're such a resilient, incredible woman. I don't know if people really understand what it took for you to get out of this.
Yeah.
And this is where I'm going to bring in, I know we spoke about this before, but for those of you who have seen the movie Wolf of Wall Street, I was telling you the first time I watched that movie many, many years ago, they portray his behavior as, yes, erratic and crazy, but almost in this funny,
Hmm.
um, just wild manner where, you watch him and you're like, oh, I want to be at that party, right? Or like, oh, I want to hang out with him. And I watched it again a couple months ago from a different perspective. And I was absolutely horrified at how they portrayed his behavior as funny and almost like, not almost acceptable,
Yeah. Yeah.
and how they minimized what you went through,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
you were kind of almost accepting of it in this, like, you're crazy, you're nuts, and that was it, and that's where it stopped. And so I'm curious for you, like, what that felt like to watch it when it was portrayed like that, or
Yeah.
bothered you.
It's interesting because I wasn't so much therapy around this.
Yeah, right.
So luckily for me, I processed it ad nauseum. And when I first saw the movie, I was like, okay, I really just cared about how they portrayed me and how it was going to affect my kids, right?
Yes.
And so I was like, okay, I'm portrayed just as this young girl who loves his husband and is, trying to protect her kids, which is the truth. But it doesn't go into the depth of the trauma that I experience, of course, because it's his narrative, it's his perspective. And when he first wrote the book, because the book became a movie, and I just remember thinking inside, I survived this incredible Greek tragedy because that's what it always felt like,
Mhm.
the depth of the pain that I had endured. And now it's entertainment. And I inside just said to myself, Nadine, I fought and wrestled with myself. But then I said, this is bigger than you, and you have
Mm,
to surrender into this.
that's difficult.
Yeah.
That, I didn't look at it like that, and I'm glad you said it like that, that your pain became other people's entertainment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah, for sure.
it reminded me of, I don't know if you remember, if you saw this, but on Lifetime, like 20, 30 years ago, there
Yeah.
was Meredith Baxter Burney played Betty Broderick.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So that first version made her look, I mean, listen, I'm not saying what she did was, for people listening, she killed her husband. I'm not saying that that is okay in any way. But the way they portrayed her in that relationship was that she was absolutely out of her mind crazy. And the husband was this amazingly doting. And then when the Netflix one came out in the Dirty John series, then they portrayed her in a very different light and portrayed her husband in a very different light. And it in a way, it kind of reminds me in a similar way of how they just got it so wrong.
Yeah.
They made her pain entertainment. And that's exactly kind of what you said. Again, I'm not saying what she did was good, but the process of it was it was very interesting to see the two dynamics. And this kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah. 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 So, and then I said, this is bigger than me and I have to surrender because,
Yeah.
and I just had to take care of my kids through the process,
Did you feel that when you hit that point of surrendering, because I think people sometimes think of surrendering as giving up or letting the other person win, but
Yeah.
it's not that. Can you talk about the difference in that?
Yeah. So for me, surrendering is recognizing that I certainly don't have control over most things.
Mhm.
And I can sit there and fight with them and hire a lawyer and make this my life's mission to stop this. It's really just a process of letting go, not necessarily agreeing, but accepting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the process of you not just leaving, but the process of healing and what that looks like for you, and kind of take us through that journey. Obviously, not every we can't talk about every step as much as I would love to do that. But,
Yeah.
for people listening who are in this or find themselves in this, who are going through the healing process, or what did it look like for you? What did you do?
Yeah. So, I was in therapy the whole time I was married to my ex-husband. And I do feel like that allowed me to manage it much better and saved my life, probably.
Did the therapist have awareness that you were in this type of relationship and what it was?
I mean, how could she not? Because I
Yeah.
literally went there every Monday at 1 p.m.,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'll never forget it because I was like living for my therapy. But
Mm-hmm.
again, back then, nobody was talking about it,
Right. Exactly.
and I think she was a good enough therapist to know that if she said to me, you should leave him, I wouldn't have come back to therapy,
Right. Okay.
right?
Yes.
Because she was a very, very well trained therapist. But back then, we weren't really using psychoeducation. Therapists weren't
Right.
educating their patients the way we
Correct.
are today. And nobody was naming these things, So she just really helped me stay safe and manage my emotions around it. So I was in therapy. And then after I left him, I went to a place called, well, see, what happened is after I left him, everybody was like, you're codependent and you're an addict. And I remember thinking to myself, I think it's more than that.
Yeah.
But again, I had no words. So I checked myself into a place called the Karen Foundation
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
in
sure.
Pennsylvania. They have a week-long program called Breakthrough.
Mhm.
And I was like, I got to get a handle on myself and my life because my life is a fucking wreck.
Yes.
And I did
Well,
that.
he made sure of that so
Yeah.
that if you were to leave, he would almost have ownership of you having a healthy life after him.
Yeah. And so I went to this place and it was an amazing foundation for me then to start my life. I learned about how to say no, how to have boundaries. Um, I learned about, my caretaking. And so it was a really good foundation for me. I stayed in therapy and luckily while I was in my marriage, I had built a little small business. So that had also given me a maternity clothing company that had started to give me a little bit of a sense of self. And I didn't isolate. And I really didn't have much contact with him at all. And I stood my ground with
Did
him.
he try to reach out?
Oh, yeah. He tried to get back with me 10,000 times. But
Uh-huh.
I said to him, my cells have memory.
I love that.
They can't go back.
I love that. And, and I say this all the time to my patients. I'm sure you say this all the time to your patients. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
So
And
true.
when you're in these types of relationships, our bodies, we know this, even if cognitively we are like not aware of what's going on, our bodies very much are.
Yes.
And, you know, people have these visceral responses and your body, in a sense, almost shuts down, right? Shuts
Well,
down. And it's almost as if the person you're dealing with is poisonous and your body knows that. You'll
Yeah.
hear this when people talk about intimacy, right? Or, the way they feel if they have to have sex, or they have sex to, to appease the person, whatever type of coercive control is going on, but their body physically rejects this other person. And it's, there's a lot of truth in the fact that your cells, remember this. I mean, it's in our tissue, it's in our cells, it's in our body.
Yeah.
And you cannot get rid of that once that is there.
Yeah. And I remember saying that to him at one lunch. And again, I didn't even know I was going to be a somatic therapist, but it's so ironic that I
Mm-hmm.
said that at 30, 31, however old I was. And I just, just stayed on my path of I turned the mirror back on me. I was so focused on him,
Yeah.
the whole marriage. Who was I? What did I need? Okay, even though I don't agree with the whole codependency label that they gave me, it did at
Mm-hmm.
least give me something to reflect on about myself
Yeah.
and learn about myself. And I had a very good self-care regimen. I surrounded myself with people that love me.
Yep.
And I went to Codependence Anonymous every single week for a year. So I was constantly resourcing myself physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally.
Yeah. And I'm sure it was not easy,
No,
you know.
well, I
You,
was filled with fear, filled
yeah.
with fear.
Yes. It's that, that feel the fear, lean into it and do it anyway.
Yeah,
Because, even if you take the tiniest steps, I like to say insultingly small steps, as long as you're moving forward, that
that's
fear starts to dissipate over time,
yeah,
not because it goes away, but because you as a human being become more willing to tolerate it.
that's
And I think people oftentimes think you have to wait for it to go away, but your body was doing exactly what it needed to do.
yeah.
So it's not going to go away. I mean, your body was responding as it should. And instead of running from that, you really leaned into that, which, speaks to your resiliency. I mean, because that's not easy.
Yeah, and I had, we can't build resiliency in isolation, right? So I had good supportive people around me, and we talk about this in therapy a lot. Is like we have to approach,
Yes.
right? The only way we build authentic confidence is approaching what we fear,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so with the help of people, never by myself, I just kept approaching life, and then I went out on a nice blind date and met my second husband who lived in Los Angeles. And I said, you know what? I'm going to pick up my kids and start over.
Good for
And
you.
we left New York and
Good.
started over. Yeah.
Before we get into kind of how that led you to what you do now and why you do what you do now, I want to just touch base on one thing you said that I think is important, because I hear this a lot, interestingly, from my patients, almost it's almost as if they need to say this or think this in order to feel better about the situation, which I understand. But you brought up something about how he was an addict, I was codependent, and I didn't agree with that because I felt like it was something more. So I
Yeah.
have a lot of patients who their significant other, their ex-partner, ex-husband, ex-wife, whatever the case may be, has some sort of massive addiction that took the forefront of their relationship. So let's use gambling, because I have that one a lot,
Mm-hmm.
where the spouse has no idea that they're $500,000 in debt, that there's money out in their name, there's credit card debt in their name, that there's gambling debt, and they're so unaware of this, right? And so they have no access to their finances, and then they find all this out after the fact. And I cannot tell you how many times I have heard from people, well, they have a gambling problem, so they need to go to rehab, with this idea that after that, it'll be okay. This person will be okay. Now, here's the thing. If it's an addiction, alcohol, drugs, finances, sex, whatever the case may be, they go into rehab, they learn the skills, they understand why they do what they do. They understand that their behavior hurts other people and they care. They don't want to hurt other people, but they can't beat this addiction. And so they work through the addiction, they come out, they're still in therapy, but they're really working on that addiction piece. That is where I would use the addiction ruins the marriage, or the addiction ruined the relationship, and the other person did what they could to help them but didn't know how. But explain why, when you're dealing with this type of personality structure, that is not the case.
Right. Yeah. And that's so true what you just said about everything. So the reason why I call this person a pathological lover, and I call them pathological because they're mentally unwell. And the way I view them very simply is this is a person who will harm, exploit, betray, use anyone and everyone to get their needs met for money, power, pleasure, and status. Right. So they have many things that drive them to do that. They have usually a cluster B personality disorder, narcissism, antisocial, histrionic, or borderline. They can have a compulsive process addiction, right? You talked about gambling or sex. They can have substance abuse. They can have a mood disorder. They can have impulsivity, right? So they also have dark tetrad traits of Machiavellianism and sadism,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I just named 7 or 8 things that go into this personality.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
that's the complexity of, and that's why they're so hard to figure out.
Yes. And I also say that, if you're dealing, let's say, without those, and you're dealing with an addiction, which obviously comes with, mood issue, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Once that behavior is resolved, or even is being worked on, all those other things that you named that may very well be there during the addiction process,
Correct.
when the addiction is resolved, if it's resolved, those things that you mentioned are not there. But if you're dealing with a personality disorder,
Right.
all of them that you named will 100% still be there. The addiction is a means, as you said, to get what they need.
Yeah.
Not the
Yeah.
other way around, right? So it's almost a symptom of the personality disorder. It's not the diagnosis.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. And as we know, do people change? For sure. Can people change? Yes. But people have to want to change. And if they're getting all their needs met, why the hell do they want to change? And if they're powerful and successful and
Mm-hmm.
whatever they want to do, there's no motivation really
None.
to change.
And, and the people that they hurt in the process, I think where there's this fine line is that they hurt people in the process of getting what they need. If you're in the way, well, that's your problem. If you get hurt, well, that's your problem. If you try to disrupt my path, the wrath that you're going to see. So it's this kind of, if you are in my way, you will get punished. You will get hurt. If you're not in my way, great.
Great.
Great. But so I wanted to touch on that because I think that's a really important topic because it confuses a lot of people. So I wanted to make sure that people understood that difference so that they don't feel like, okay, well, once they come out of AA or once they come out of Gamblers Anonymous, that it's going to be better. Because if you're dealing with this type of narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, that's not going to be the case.
Correct.
They'll hide it again. They're never going to stop. It'll go into another type of addiction. They faked their way through it basically. And, it's not going to get better. If anything, it gets worse.
Correct.
Right. Would you say that if you stayed, your relationship would have gotten better or worse?
Oh God, I hate to even think about that.
Right.
But I don't think that my emotional needs would have ever mattered.
Do you think that had you stayed, and I'm saying this again for people listening, thinking if they stay or that it'll somehow get better because that hope is there, clinging to who the person was in the very beginning, which wasn't them anyway.
Correct.
Do you think that there's anything else that you could have done to make the relationship better?
No. Oh
No.
God, no.
Right.
I always say I could have hung myself upside down and vomited green, and nothing would have changed.
Correct. Correct. And I really want people to hear that this is not your fault.
No.
None of this was your fault.
No.
And none of this, as far as their behavior, is in your control.
No, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book was to destigmatize the victim because I got so sick of everybody saying, "Why does she stay?" To
Yes.
me, why does he do that?
Yes.
Right? Like that beautiful Lindsay Bancroft book. So, really to destigmatize the victim
Yep.
because I was not responsible for his drug addiction, for his control, for his threat, for his
Right.
rage, yet I received it.
That's
So I
right.
didn't. So I left. And
That's right.
you can leave too.
That's right. That's right. So for people listening again, tell us, so you get out, you went through all this, this therapy, and you worked so hard
Yeah.
to figure out who you were, to regain this sense of identity, because were with him young. So your sense of identity and who you were probably wasn't even fully formed when you were with him. So you come out of this not only not knowing who you are, but you don't even know who you were before you met him, probably. So you had to almost start building your sense of self from scratch. So talk to people about how you did that, how it led you to your career today, and how it led you to write your book, and just kind of take us through.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was in the so I married, so I got married, remarried, and my second husband was in the garment business just like me. So I was working a lot, and working really helped build up my self-esteem
Mm-hmm.
in my early 30s. It really built up my confidence. I liked to work. But then I was in fashion. I was like, you know what? I don't want to know the trends all the time. So I started to meditate and drink green juice and do yoga like everybody does in LA. And I started to, in my meditation, it came to me like, go back to school to be a therapist. So at 39, I went back to school. I actually had to finish a year and a half of undergrad, did my master's, and then you have to get thousands of hours, as you know, to be licensed. So I
Mm-hmm.
said, let me continue with my doctorate. And I love to learn. And so while I was doing all this, the book came out, then the movie came out, and I never spoke about it because I had nothing to say. But while I was in my practice in Los
I
Angeles,
love that, by the way. Not to cut you off, but I had nothing to say. I mean, did you ever think you'd get to that point?
it's funny. I wish I could say I had like this whole big grand scheme, like how about how all this turns out. And I
Yeah.
didn't. It was a process of trusting my gut and surrendering. And when the movie came out, I didn't know I was going to be focused on trauma bonds, and they wanted to interview me, but what was I going to say? Yeah, I was in a marriage and it sucked, and I got
Yes.
tortured, and they made a movie about it. Like,
Yes.
so I didn't say anything till I really had something to say. And what happened was that all these smart, bright, beautiful, kind women were coming into my office, financially abused, coercively controlled, getting betrayed, getting cheated. And I was like, we have a
And
problem.
it's an epidemic.
It's an epidemic. And I was just like, are we in the 1950s? Like, what is happening? So then I just went back to the research, and and I just started to learn about dark tetrad and trauma bonds and cognitive dissonance and intermittent abuse. And I read a great book in 2019 by Sandra Brown, Women Who Love Psychopaths, that really changed my life and gave me a whole new perspective and a lot of new terms, combined with Lindsay Bancroft and a lot of old researchers like Donald Dutton, right? And so I just put together this whole, just gathered all this research. I mean, my research papers had like coffee stains and syrup stains. And I just said, I'm going to write this book. And it just came out of me. And that was honestly just how it all happens. And I wish I could say I planned it, but
It was probably so cathartic too, to just write all that. And it's interesting because, people ask me too, how did you get into this field? How did you, and honestly, I just, when I started my practice many years ago,
yeah,
I just kept seeing mostly women come into my office with the coercive control and the financial abuse and the emotional abuse. And it was so constant and frequent, and nobody talked about it.
right.
No, but they felt so alone, and it was, no matter who they were, where they came from, it was identical.
Yeah,
That's the part about this, I think, that always blows my mind, is that depression manifests differently, right? Anxiety manifests differently. When you're talking about particularly narcissistic personality disorder, the behaviors that you see, I mean, yeah, they're dressed up a little differently, but the function is exactly the same across the board.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to have power and control over their partner.
Yeah.
There's many, many different ways, break down their self-esteem, right? Yeah. And it really wasn't spoken about. And it's so great that it is spoken about because it is a very isolating experience and there's so much shame with it. And
Oh, yeah.
there's so
Yeah.
much embarrassment. And there's just so much to climb through to get out of it. And then you have children and you have financial dependency. And then there's just so many things, the court system, right?
Mm-hmm.
That works against all of us in breaking free and getting healthier. Yet, here we are today having this conversation.
Right. That's right.
And my book was a labor of love. It was the hardest thing I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'll ever do that again. It was a very humbling experience. I don't think I realized what it took to do
Yep.
it. But that's my typical personality. Oh, I'll do that. And then I'm like,
Right.
what the hell am I doing?
Right.
But I love hearing from women how much it's helping them. And that makes it all worth it.
I think that's one of the best parts about this is that when, especially with a book like yours, when you have this feedback of you saved my life, or, oh my God, I felt like I was reading about my own life, and they realize they're not alone. It's
Yep.
not their fault.
It's not their fault. I mean, I just got a text as we're here. Just want to say I finished your book last night. Absolutely incredible. I felt like you were speaking directly to me based on everything I'm feeling. I'm so grateful I am connected to you.
I mean, there's nothing
That's
better.
it.
There's
That's it.
nothing
Right?
better.
And so it's so beautiful to have generativity.
Before we end, I do want to have you talk about one thing just so people understand what it is and why it's so important. Can you talk about your particular area of expertise with somatic therapy and tell people what that is and why it's so important in this healing process?
Sure. I got my doctorate in somatic psychotherapy, and basically that's a fancy way of saying we really take the body into consideration in the clinical encounter. And we know because trauma lives in the body, right? It's an experience that overwhelms us, and our nervous system really, unfortunately, integrates it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really need to work with the body in the room with a lot of people that experience trauma, right? And that's just breath work because after a trauma bond, you feel so unsafe in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do I get the people to feel safe in their body with breath work, with grounding, with exercises, and really listening to their body and helping them be able to contain their feelings, right? Because there's so much emotional dysregulation that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And as we know, our thoughts in our mind aren't always our best friend. So I always say the true self lives between like your throat to your pelvic floor.
I love that.
And
I
that's
love that.
right.
Yes.
Right. So I just start to connect them back there, back there.
I'm going to use that. I will give you full credit, but that's brilliant because
No,
it's so true.
yeah, no, I wish I could say it's one of those billion of clinicians that I've read that said it. But that's maybe it was Ariel Schwartz or somebody like that. But just that. So I'm like always connecting them back to their
Yeah.
body. That's where their authentic self lives and they lost themselves.
And that's a scary place for, people who have survived this type of abuse, this type of trauma, but that it's a scary place to be. And this is why also I tell people when they get out of these relationships or even when they're in them, more so when they're in them. I mean, this is why you see these bizarre skin rashes and IBS and migraines and joint pain and autoimmune diseases flare up. It's not coincident. I mean, it's connected. It's
Yeah.
all connected. So Nadine, this was amazing. I could talk to you for hours about this.
We'll meet for lunch next time.
Yes, I think you're just incredible and not, not just because of quote, the story, but just the way you handled it, the way you got out, but more importantly, what you did after you got out, because it is not easy and you just killed it. I mean, you just killed it. So, I think you're just incredible, truly.
Oh, thank you. And here's the thing, right? For anybody listening, I'm 56, right? So this is years and years of work finally coming together. So like you said, you used the cute terms, insultingly.
Mhm.
Yeah, like just little steps every day towards a life that you want. I promise, get you there. That doesn't mean my life has been perfect. I mean,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
life still has shit that it throws
Yes.
at all of us, as you
Yes.
know.
Yes.
But, especially for women, you're stronger than you know.
Mhm.
And just keep working on yourself. I promise it catches up in a good way.
Mhm. Where can people find you, find your book, find your
Yes.
services, all of that?
So Dr. Nae.com. I have tons of free resources, tons of assessments, pathological lover checklist, trauma bond assessment on my website, The Real Dr. Nadine on Instagram. TikTok is the Wild West. I'm on there. Dr. Nae LMFT, and I answer all my direct messages. I love connecting with, all my followers. And I don't know, this was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. And we'll definitely have to chat again because I know people are going to benefit from this so much. So thank you so much for taking the time. And we'll definitely have you back on soon.
Great.
Take care, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. I hope you found it useful, but most importantly, I hope you found it validating. Want to work one-on-one with me? Visit my website at drjamiezuckerman.com to book a personalized coaching session, and be sure to check out my on-demand workshops on topics like co-parenting with a narcissist, life after leaving, anxiety management strategies, and more. Again, that's drjamiezuckerman.com. You'll also find links to my interactive workbooks, merchandise, resources, and newsletter sign up. Next Up Narcissism is as much your podcast as it is mine. I want to hear your feedback and what you want to hear. So make sure to leave a podcast review wherever you listen, or send an email to nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Again, that's nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to tune in next week to see what's up next on Next Up Narcissism.